Hello and a warm welcome to the Open Treasury podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. I am your host, Pushpendra Mehta. Joining me today is Craig Jeffery, Managing Partner at Strategic Treasurer. Craig, it's always a pleasure to have you back on the podcast. Welcome.
It's good to be back on CTMfile's podcast too. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to join us and share your valuable insights as we explore critical topics shaping the landscape of corporate treasury management and beyond. This is our last podcast episode of the year 2024, and we thought it would be fitting to close the year by looking ahead to what corporate treasury and their teams can expect in 2025 and beyond. To do that, we will first discuss key treasury management trends that are likely to shape the treasury landscape in the coming year, and then move on to their primary attributes for leading corporate treasury in 2030. Our audience can watch videos on the CTMfile YouTube channel and explore insightful articles, interviews, and industry roundups on CTMfile.com, either by visiting the website or by following the links provided in our show notes. Let's begin today's discussion with the first story, which is about 6 treasury management trends for 2025. Numentia, a treasury solutions firm, has identified these trends, highlighting how economic uncertainty and rapid technological advancements are creating both challenges and opportunities for treasurers. Treasurers are bracing for a transformative year. Keeping this in mind, Numentia has summarized the 6 most important treasury trends for 2025. These include a renewed focus on liquidity management and cash flow forecasting, the standardization of fragmented systems and processes, particularly the need for centralizing payment transactions with unified payment hubs, the growing emphasis on access to real-time information via APIs, AI's potential in treasury management becoming increasingly evident with practical use cases emerging in cash flow forecasting, cash positioning, and foreign exchange management, the rise in payments fraud demanding advanced security measures, and finally, the development of central bank digital currencies continues to generate significant interest. Last week, Craig, your company's strategic treasurer, hosted the 2025 Treasury Trends webinar sponsored by Kyriba, which is available for our audience to watch on Strategic Treasurer's website, strategictreasurer.com. From Numentia's Treasury Management Trends and Strategic Treasurer's 2025 Treasury Trends webinar, which areas, Craig, do you think would be the top priorities for corporate treasurers and the teams of the next 12 months?
Well, the focus on liquidity management and cash flow certainly will be top. While I don't believe that the economic volatility has been massive, it's been more in the moderate range. It's not completely smooth sailing, and it's not completely dramatic. There's been a lot of changes on the geopolitical front. There are multiple wars going on, but it's in the, within one standard deviation of the normal. So it's not particularly trying times like, let's say, in the height of COVID or during severe market dislocation. And yet, because interest rates are changing, access to capital is different, the focus on liquidity management and cash flow is always in vogue. I mean, cash is king. It's the entire royal family. I think we can always say that. It is certainly in the more important third of different cycles. So that will continue to be a key area. I think Numentia was right on identifying that. We can take good instruction from what they've said on that. Another topic was the connected systems. This whole shift of technology and how it's moved is creating great opportunities amidst a lot of tech debt. The fact that people have invested in technology over time means you have to rip something out to put something new in, or you have to account for it, especially when you're working with second generation, third generation old tech, and you're bringing in new generation technology. Some of those items just don't fit well together. And so seeing that continual movement and upgrade, different ways of connecting, different methods of sharing information that are better and faster, that's probably one of the most important areas of moving that together, and that ties into the API environment, or API first. Treasury is getting faster, needs to be faster, needs to analyze faster. To do that, you need more information. Now, I say that not to say that everything has to be instantaneous, There are many use cases for where immediate matters, where instant matters from payment use cases, but not everything has to be instant. And yet nothing is moving slower. So this movement of technology helps us to move more quickly, but more importantly, move better with better data for better analysis. And that ties into the other point that you brought up, the artificial intelligence and machine learning. One of their points was real-time data, the use of APIs. So when data is available, it gets pushed, it gets moved to the next area. This idea of streaming Treasury, streaming businesses matters more and more to a larger percentage of companies. We're used to that in our personal lives from the rideshare app. It's like, I need to know that right away. Where's the car? Where's it coming? I want to make the payment. I want that seamless. There are more and more use cases in the corporate world. It's not just faster payments, but it's faster information and better information. The ability to connect more readily lowers those hurdles. And so those two things, the use of APIs, disjointed systems, we need to be able to connect those. You can't just say we're always going to go to one monolithic system that does everything. There isn't one system that does everything. And so we need to adapt to a world where these connections need to be made. Things are moving faster. We definitely need better information. So APIs matter. And some of these tools like artificial intelligence help us to perform tasks far more efficiently, far more accurately, if they're done right and used right. And so there's a learning curve and a learning cycle to that. Those are massive changes that are taking place. I think this report that they've written, I think they're spot on those potential areas.
You mentioned faster payments, and faster payments means faster fraud, the well-known adage. You run a very successful payment security training course, securetreasury.com. From a payments fraud perspective, are you concerned that the next year will see an expanded rise in payments fraud or a surge in payments fraud?
My concern over a rise in fraud stems from more sophisticated adversaries, criminals who are more sophisticated. Faster payments by themselves does not mean faster fraud. Non-repudiatable transactions that can't be returned. If they're an error, where they settle in 9 seconds or they settle later, the different elements of risk management are part of that environment. Better payments and better security around those payments is far more important in my mind. I think many companies have said, hey, it's faster. I don't want to lose money more rapidly. And there's certainly some truth to that under any payment rail that you use. So the concern about fraud is about, what is your structure? What are the banking structures you have to reduce where funds can flow out of? How can they be monitored and detected? What are the services you use at the bank side? So structure and services matter, as do the people, the overall processes, and some of the underlying and third-party technology that provides assurances and validations on where you're making payments. One of the top concerns is, how do we gain efficiency on our payments when we're making changes to payments, because that's a key opportunity for payments to be redirected. That creates an efficiency issue, it creates a security challenge, and so services are coming in to help with that. So better payments can mean better fraud protection. Faster payments, if they're wrapped up with better processes, can provide better protection for organizations. And just because you have the ability to settle and go through the payment rails in 10 seconds or less doesn't mean you're going to just send everything instantly. You might be providing some communication about when payments are made. There might be other validation services that are taking place. And when the transfer moves securely. Communicating to other parties when they're going to be paid, I think that ability to communicate more broadly with your trading partners when something's going to be paid and when changes are being made, that extra validation reduces the level of risk. One of the key 12 security principles is speed matters, not just settlement speed, but speed of detecting a problem. And if there's no notice to the receiving party until something hits their bank account, and they're waiting, why isn't my favorite customer paying me? Now it's 2 weeks later, I got to call them and say, did something get missed? It's no, we've been paying you every week. I think that points us to a better process makes a significant difference, no matter how quickly the payment rail settles.
Craig, thank you for sharing your discerning insights and for helping us explore these critical trends for the years ahead. Next up, let's delve into the second story, which focuses on the four key attributes that will define corporate treasury leadership leading up to 2030. Treasurers perform a challenging role. They ensure the company has adequate liquidity, minimize financial risks, and containing net financing costs so that they do not materially impact cash flow. They have the vital mission of supporting the CFO in capital strategy, and they must do this in all financial conditions, noted Shamir Khalik, Global Head of Services at Citi, in Citi's latest corporate treasury-focused Global Perspectives and Solutions report, Treasury 2030, Modernize or Risk Irrelevance. This report, developed by Citi's Services Client Advisory Group in collaboration with Xanders, reveals that by 2030, Treasury will evolve to exhibit four distinct traits or attributes that will define Treasury leadership in the future. First, Treasury will have to serve as the center of excellence to govern all financial transactions. Second, treasurers will have to transition from being risk and liquidity managers to chief returns and risk officers. Third, they will need to embrace a 24/7 real-time mindset. And fourth, employ AI as the core of a new treasury operating system to enable automation. Craig, Citi's report highlights four key attributes that will redefine or define treasury leadership by 2030. Of these, what do you think are the most important attributes, and do you believe are there any other critical traits that treasurers will need to develop to remain effective in the future?
So the four items that were identified, maybe I'll just speak to each of those briefly or share some of my thoughts on those. Serving as a center of excellence to govern all financial transactions. I think that's really helpful. We see Treasury as the superintendent of payments. That doesn't mean they do everything on all payments, but they're the superintendent of payments. And so that's a superintendent of transactions, digital financial transactions that are occurring. That doesn't mean they own AP or own accounts receivable, but if they're superintending payments and how things flow, this requires a different set of activities because many of the center of excellence groups are not Treasury, they're AP, they're order to cash, order to collect. And so what does this look like is probably a more involved discussion. But I think that's really vital because so many things are changing with how payments are made. We're involving not just the two, it's not just a binary relationship between payee and payor. There's other parties that can be in there, other parties for providing additional capital, whether it's supply chain financing or factoring, et cetera. So I think serving as the center of excellence, I might not use that term when I think about that. I invite everybody to read their report. It's very useful. But certainly, what does it mean to be the superintendent of payments has some aspects there of what's efficient, what supports our relationships, what supports our capital structure. And then there's the machine and factory that go behind on that. And so I think of more the center of excellence more on the factory behind that. And so that's the part where I have maybe it's a terms challenge with it. I think their mind's in the right place. I think their heart's in the right place too. I just might be getting hung up on a couple of those words. That's a key area that has long been overlooked, and I really applaud them for pointing that out and bringing that up again, if for no other reason than to talk about it more carefully, because we believe strongly that Treasury is the superintendent of payments. Many of those transactions are payment transactions, and Treasury can't just look to the side and ignore what are the repercussions for working capital, for the ability of the organization to grow, security around payments. I found that quite helpful. The second topic, treasurers transitioning from risk and liquidity managers to chief returns and risk officers. I'm all for people coming up with new terms that can help define the process. And I don't want to be brutal here. They state the objective is to bring together a firm-wide deep understanding of the core business risks, financial risks, and operational risks. So things that are risks you take, risks you manage, and risks you mitigate. I think that's core for Treasury, and I see that as being defined as risk and liquidity managers. Chief returns and risk officers. Chief risk officer is an existing title. So, this idea of chief returns, I have a harder time with the chief returns and risk officer. As they describe it, or as it's described, it's like the risk and reward, the efficient frontier on investments, the balancing those things. That fits to the core of what Treasury does. What are the risks that are worthy of taking on which ones need to be mitigated. So I really like how they're describing it. I just think we might need a better title for that role. But what they're saying is very true. And it is what many people are doing with maybe some of the existing titles, risk and liquidity managers. But thinking of that in the risk reward, kind of this optimized risk officer type role certainly makes sense. The third area push that the report mentions, you had mentioned this idea of a real-time mindset, this idea of data is streaming across the organization as it happens, it occurs. We move away from this periodic pulse of files that move around between partners or within our own systems at night or on a scheduled basis to, as things occur, there's this update. I think that idea of this mindset, it's a real-time mindset is a core of that. The other aspect of it's a data-first mentality. So it's data, ability to connect rapidly. You need data. You need to move rapidly. And so we talked earlier about nothing's moving slower, more things are moving faster. How do we make ourselves more agile with how we manage data? The data needs to be cleaner. It needs to be connected. So that connection is happening real time and increasing measure in some organizations. Some organizations are still very much in batch or overnight mode for everything. And so that's going to change dealing with our counterparties, dealing with our bank transactions, dealing inside our organizations. That perspective of a real-time and a data-first mindset has to be how we think about things because we're transitioning there. We're not there. There's certainly two speeds. One of my friends talks about two-speed Treasury. It's very interesting. We have to have this conversion period of this time of transition to real-time and better data, and there's much to be gained from that with better analysis, faster analysis. Better analysis and faster analysis means you're making better decisions with less risk. That fits it to the heart of what Treasury does, so I like that a lot. The fourth area, I think, is one of the best points that's made in this report. They say employing AI is the core of a new Treasury operating system to enable automation. That is a massive banner. It's a good banner. If we're looking for treasuries that do more, they provide better analysis, better action. This idea of synthesis and analysis requires better data, faster data, and a more improved way of handling that. And how that gets handled better is oftentimes going to include artificial intelligence. You need the environment to operate on that. You need to have better data. You need to have data captured in a way that you can use that securely and the right people can have access to the right information to do that. One of the key things is that research that Citi did showed that Treasury departments often lack adequate funding for technology and resources in spite of everything that's going on. But the availability of AI tools is coming to organizations in several ways. One, with the banks and with the technology providers. The fintechs are building that into their systems that you can take advantage of it. There's also greater availability of using tools, whether it's from IBM or somebody else, where you can put your data in there, use and manage that, even if you have lots of legacy systems that aren't capable of doing that. There is definitely an opportunity there for organizations.
Well, Craig, you made some great points, and I couldn't agree more. Finally, Craig, what is your choice for the biggest or most important story of the past week or this week, and why?
You had kindly highlighted some of the stories. You filtered up a few of the stories for me to review, which is really helpful because there's quite a bit going on. A couple of the articles that came out were the one on top-line growth, stand charts, 2025 global economic predictions. There were some interesting facts there, as well as the U.S.-China technological rivalry escalates with new export restrictions. If you're asking me which one of those I think is more important, I don't want to be pigeonholed into saying this one's more important or that, but the theme, there's elements of the theme that are in both. One of the themes is a little more detailed in the second article about the export restrictions, but they tie together. I mean, the core issues, I think, tied together with what's going to go on with the economy. What are the big concerns? Well, top line growth, 19%. 1 in 5 think it's going to go slower. Okay, we look at executive gap, 17%. So that's a lot. 1 in 6 companies is having an executive gap. 15% are identifying costs going up. These are all headwinds, but they're not totally dramatic. They're important, but those are some headwinds. The overall Standard Charter's view of economic growth refers to it as flat, reducing from 3.2% growth to 3.1%. And when I hear the term flat, I always think of, is that 0% GDP growth? But it's staying similar to the prior year at 3.1%. So we're not saying globally, or they're not thinking globally there's going to be a recession, though. France and Germany, there's more expectations that there's a potential for those two large European economies to perhaps dip below positive growth. So when we think about tariffs and trade, I'll just say a few things. I don't know if you've ever played the game Catan. So you're trading all these resources, and what's the strategy of playing Catan? There can be like build alliances and put the robber on different places. But one strategy seems to be good is to have as much trade as you can that benefits both parties. Even if it's a little more positive for the other person and yet positive for you, if you do more trade that's on a net benefit to you, you should do better over time. The fact that if you have good trade, that's very beneficial. Trade that's very unfair or biased is not very helpful. And so to the extent that the incoming president of the U.S. is talking about all this unfair trade, if you've ever read his Art of the Deal or heard excerpts of it, there's certainly a lot of posturing that's being set up, but there's pretty large tariffs being put out there, and you can see some reactions right away of people trying to say, hey, let's not do that. Let's fix whatever the issues are. Good and fair trade so you can buy and sell without a one-way direction, I think ultimately becomes good. It might become very hard to get to that, but tariffs can be a significant challenge, certainly in the short term, and certainly if they're just punitive, because it can escalate into, we're going to punish you, we're going to do more. If you can get it so that the trade is easier and it's beneficial to both sides on an overall basis, maybe not each individual trade. Someone traded bricks or granite or trees or whatever the items are in Catan. But if overall the trade is beneficial, that will help the overall economies. Now, whatever your particular industry you might be in, you might be a little put out because you might not have the advantage over the particular trading partner. That's a really long-winded way and a tie into a game that you probably didn't want me to hear me launching about Catan. And if nobody's played Catan, then you're like, what are you talking about? But the tech rivalry with China, we're seeing two things. U.S. is restricting technology, particularly technology that has wartime and defense and offensive capabilities. They're restricting that so it's not getting into the U.S. to China is a key area. And so they're restricting the technology side. And China is responding as well, stepping up things on the material side, some of the rare earth metals, some of the different materials from going out. So we see these things ratcheting up. No, you don't get the tech. No, you don't get the material. So I think different advanced components, semiconductors, all of those are very significant areas. So the two articles talk about trade, tariffs, restrictions. Tariffs and restrictions are going to be part of it. That's, the geopolitical game, different nations figuring out what makes the most sense for them from a defense position, posture standpoint. I think those things fit together pretty well. I think the more significant impact over the longer term, over multiple years, is going to be the technological rivalry. I think that's a more significant story because that continues to expand, and I don't see a great way of that being relieved. Tariffs on washing machines and other elements, those should be able to get worked out pretty well because they benefit both countries or the global trade quite well. And so just because it's, okay, someone's got corn, someone's got more corn, someone has more wheat, someone has more pine trees for building materials, those things get worked out. And so someone's lost a little bit because, there's a difference between, U.S. and Canada or Mexico where the advantage is. U.S. and China are very big trading partners. So much of that could be handled in a way that I think everybody would see as more fair and more beneficial. I think that other aspect is probably the more significant story, and that's something that we'll continue to watch.
As we wrap up this podcast episode, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to you, Craig, for sharing your insightful viewpoints. Your valuable perspectives have truly enriched today's discussion. We would also like to express our deep gratitude to our CTMfile audience for joining us on the last episode of the Open Treasury podcast in 2024. We truly appreciate your support throughout the year. Be sure to stay tuned as we return next year with more engaging conversations and expert perspectives. In the meantime, please subscribe and check the show notes for the article links. Wishing you all the best for a prosperous and successful 2025. This podcast is provided for information purposes only, and statements made by CTMfile or guests on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, or consulting advice. For more information, visit ctmfile.com.